I guess it was over a year and a half ago now that I posted on Facebook that when the biographers write the story of Steve Marler, they will divide it into two volumes. The section before I discovered the sci-fi adventures of Rick and Morty, and the volume covering the later portion of my life after I had discovered the science fiction adventures of Rick and Morty. The show is that important to me. I love it. I absolutely love Rick and Morty. And like most people who really love Rick and Morty, I was very disappointed by season 3. Uh, and I have a theory. I have a theory. There are people who were not disappointed by season 3. There are people who say that season 3 of Rick and Morty was just as good as the other seasons. And my theory is that those people never really were that into Rick and Morty in the first place. We just didn't notice. We being people like me who are really into Rick and Morty. Let me tell you, I enjoy an episode of The Simpsons now and then. Early Family Guy, all over it. All over early Family Guy. I love some of South Park. You know, even American Dad has some hits with me every now and then. And what I really, really, really love is Futurama. I've seen every episode of Futurama multiple times. It's the only TV show of its length of which I can say that. And so having been a fan of Futurama for a long, long time, and Futurama came and went and it ran its course and I was left with nothing, when I found Rick and Morty filled that niche for me, wherein there had been nothing. Not only was Futurama the best show of its kind, but it was the only show of its kind. There was, Futurama is done, and now we have Rick and Morty. So I never really thought about that before, but yeah, it came right when we needed it. It covers the same niche, even if, like, regardless of which one you think is better, they're both science fiction animated comedies, have a lot of the same things going on. But I like Rick and Morty even more than Futurama, at least if you go only by the first two seasons. It's only fair to compare or if we want to compare the first three seasons of Rick and Morty to the first three seasons of Futurama. You can't compare all of Futurama to all of Rick and Morty. It's unfair at this point. But anyway, so I saw, I guess it was a little over a year ago. It was April Fool's Day. The first episode of season 3 dropped, and I, like many people, had been in suspense. I was hugely in suspense because I had started watching Rick and Morty during this long period in between season 2 and season 3, and just within a couple months, I was all caught up. I'd seen every single Rick and Morty episode, plus like a couple shorts, So I saw everything that was available, most of the commentaries, every episode multiple times over a span of a few months, and then I had to sit and wait, and then suddenly it was April Fool's Day, 2017. The new episode dropped. We all remember what happened. It was wonderful. We all loved it. It was perfect. It was exactly what we wanted, I think. I think I speak for the consensus when I say that episode 1 of season 3 of Rick and Morty was exactly what we wanted. It was exactly what we were looking for. But the rest of the season sucked. And we realized something was going wrong when we were watching season 2. I remember I was watching season 2 with a friend of mine who had a little kid. Or season 3, episode 2. And like none of us were into it on any level. The juvenile humor didn't work. The plot wasn't engaging. Nothing worked. And so, and the rest of season 3 was a failure too, except among people. Again, there are people who think that season 3 was just fine, but those are people who never really loved Rick and Morty that much in the first place. These are people who, and we didn't notice. We thought that they loved it just as much as we do. No. This whole time, these people were calling themselves Rick and Morty fans, but they never really thought it was any better than Family Guy. We just never pressed them on the issue. It never came up. But they never really thought that it was any better than Futurama. These are all just one thing. Rick and Morty was no different. And because they didn't recognize season 1 and 2 of Rick and Morty as really being any different than any other animated TV show, they didn't recognize that season 3 was different, that season 3 was lacking something. It didn't have what was in season 1 and season 2 of Rick and Morty that made them awesome. So I decided to do this series. I'm not the first, but I decided to do a video explaining exactly how season 3 of Rick and Morty is not that great. I mean, you could look at it as not that great if you just look at it as on its own, or you could look at it as deeply disappointing if you really loved, as I did, season 1 and 2 in the first place. I'm wondering if this is what it was like for really, really serious Star Trek or Star Wars fans, you know, really serious fans when episode 1 came out. And then slowly dawned on you that it sucked, you know. A lot of people were in denial for a while, going through multiple viewings of episode 1 without being able to admit to themselves that they were watching garbage. It's kind of what it was like for me when I saw episode 2 and 3 and 4 of season 3, and I was like, this is garbage, this is trash. And then we started getting the backlash from the idiot guys, you know, who misidentified the problem. We've all heard enough from them. But they were correct that season 3 really sucked. They were not correct about why, I don't think. I'm not going to get into why season 3 sucked. I don't know. I don't know why it sucked, but I do know I can't explain how, or at least I think so. So I decided, to be fair, I would go back and rewatch all of Rick and Morty in original episode order, which I've never done before. And because originally I watched a good chunk of season 1 in one night, but not the pilot. And interestingly, the pilot ended up being one of the last episodes. I think it was one of the last 2 episodes that I saw. So I had kind of a unique experience having watched almost all of season 1 and 2, and even the Groundhog's Day special, and then watching the pilot for the first time. And so I'm going to talk about now I'm going to watch the pilot again, and then I'm going to talk about it. Okay? Okay, I just watched the pilot episode of Rick and Morty, and the interesting thing about this episode, in my opinion, I think that it's interesting how it sets up so many of the characters, not only the major characters, but even the teacher. Like, this was an episode that really introduced Mr. Goldenfold, and it introduced him as a man who doesn't mind getting sexual gratification from a child if it should happen to come up. Which is kind of interesting that they went there in the very first episode, now that I think about it. Because when I first watched this, I didn't notice. I didn't think that that was that big a deal, but that's because I was watching it having seen 2 seasons of some stuff, man, you know? But this time I went back and I was like, oh, that was the pilot. That was the pilot episode where Mr. Goldenfold says, hey, not my fault this is happening, while he's basically getting a hand job from a teenager. Highly inappropriate. His responsibility to stop it as the teacher in that situation. But he's like, well, you know, I guess I'm being passive here. So that's some stuff to lay on us in the first episode of the series. First time we see that character go that deep into it. I'm a little bit surprised. I was also surprised when I look back on my viewing of season 1 and 2. I remember that there was some episode where Rick Sanchez is really emotional about his breakfast, and he's like, oh, I really wish your mom was here to see this. It's one of the few times we see him show any emotion for his wife, whatever happened to her. We don't know if she's dead or gone or whatever. And I had remembered that this was somewhere in the first 2 seasons. I had forgotten that, again, that was actually the pilot. So it's an example of a conversation which was like the most extreme conversation of its kind in the entire first 2 seasons. And it was in the pilot. He almost never talks about his dead wife again, and doesn't show a whole lot of affection for his family over the run of the first 2 seasons the way I remember it. But he did in the pilot. And maybe that's part of his manipulativeness, you know. Because this is Rick Sanchez we're talking about here. He's the smartest being in the universe, and that means he's manipulative, and that means that he can string you along. He can give you just enough. He can give you just what you need. He can give you just enough to keep you going, to keep you coming back to him. He'll give you just enough. And so I felt compelled to watch the whole season. So I guess I feel good about watching the whole series again. So I just watched episodes 1 and 2 of season 1. It's kind of ironic because episode 2 of season 1 is one of the very first ones that I watched in that first batch. And then episode 1 I didn't watch until the very, very end. Wait, that's not interesting. That's the other thing. Here's some relationship advice. Don't have your kids too early. Huh? Enjoy your 20s. Enjoy your 30s. Enjoy your 40s. Wait to have kids. Buy a house first. Buy a good set of knives. Okay? Have a subscription to Hulu or Netflix. Because your hobbies are over when you have kids. When you have kids are your hobby. They're your only hobby. So, you know, no rush with that. Don't hurry into it. If you're really bummed out and stressed out because you want to have kids and you can't, you know, just let the stress go away. Just let it slide off you. This is Marler with Marler's Movie Reviews and Relationship Advice.